"Give way, you painted post," the young lord said, and when the sentry did not move, he peeled the white glove from his right hand and struck him across the face with it. I was close enough to hear the soft slap of kid leather on a cold cheek, close enough to see the glove fall after, to the wet stone between them and lie there like a dead bird. The whole forecourt seemed to hold its breath at once, 50 of us under the gas lamps, our collars up against the river damp, every one of us suddenly very still. My name is Tobias Quill, and I keep a sweet and tobacco stall at the corner of the King's Mile, just outside the vain gate of the Garrowmore Palace, and I have stood at those black and gold railings most evenings of my working life. I have seen a great many things at that gate. I had never, until that night, seen a man strike one of the household foot and live to wish, with his whole ruined heart, that he had not. The lamps had only just been lit. The lamplighter's boy had gone down the mile with his long pole an hour before, touching each glass to flame, so that the forecourt lay under a row of soft gold moons, and the cobbles shone black with the evening's fog. The carriages had been coming and going since dusk. There was a great supper inside the palace, the autumn table they called it, and half the high houses of the kingdom had sent their lacquered coaches clattering up the mile to set down ladies in furs and gentlemen in tall hats at the foot of the state stair. The young lord had come in one of the finest. I had marked it when it drew up, a black brougham with silver lamps and a coat of arms on the door, 2 gray horses steaming in the cold. I had marked him, too, when he climbed down, because he climbed down badly, gripping the door, his hat already crooked. He had been at the wine before he ever reached us. A footman tried to take his arm and was shaken off. He came up the cobbles toward the gate with the loose, careful stride of a man who knows he is not steady and means to dare anyone to say so. He stopped at the inner line, where the sentry stood his post. I should tell you about the sentry, because in the end this is his story and not the Lord's, though the Lord thought it was his. He stood at the right-hand side of the vain gate, under the third lamp, in the long gray greatcoat of the household foot, with the tall black cap and the white crossbelt and the polished rifle at his shoulder. I had seen him there 100 nights. I did not know his name then. I knew only that he was one of the still ones. There are still men and there are very still men, and he was of the second kind. He did not shift his weight. He did not blow on his hands. When the fog beaded on the peak of his cap and ran down, he let it run. His eyes were fixed on some point above the heads of the crowd, on the dark river beyond the mile, and they did not come down for carriages, or for ladies, or for the boys who liked to make faces at him through the bars. He was the kind of stillness that makes a noisy man nervous, and the young lord was a noisy man. "You there?" the lord said. He had a high, carrying voice, the kind bred to be heard across a hunting field. "Yes, you. The gate's narrow tonight, and your great clumsy boots are in my way. Stand off. I am expected at the table." The sentry did not move. He was not, in fact, in the lord's way. There was room and to spare on the cobbles, the whole breadth of the forecourt. But a drunk man does not measure the world by what is there. He measures it by what dares to be in front of him. A few people had stopped. They always do at the gate. A man and his wife with a sleeping infant bundled against the cold. 2 clerks in long coats with their collars up. A flower seller folding her last stems into a basket. Myself, leaning on my stall, near enough to touch the railing. We were a small crowd, but we were a crowd, and the Lord could feel us, and that, I think, was the thing that lit him. "Are you deaf?" he said louder. "Or only stupid?" I said. "Stand off. Do you know who I am?" The sentry's eyes did not come down. Now there is a particular silence a still man can make, and it is not an empty thing. It is a held thing. It pressed on that forecourt like a hand. The Lord's gray horses tossed their heads and the harness rang. Somewhere up the mile a dog barked once and stopped. The Lord stood swaying very slightly under the lamp, his fine face going from red to a deeper red, and I watched him understand slowly, through the wine, that the man in front of him was not going to be moved by anything he had ever used to move men before. That was when he reached up and pulled off his glove. I knew what it meant. We all knew. It is the old gesture, the thing men of his sort do when they mean to demand satisfaction, the glove drawn off and thrown down, or laid across the face, the challenge that says you and I will settle this with seconds and pistols at dawn. I had never seen it done in the street. I had heard of it, the way you hear of duels in old stories, half believing they still happened in the back gardens of the great houses before the sun was up. To see it done here, at the gate, to a man who could not by his own discipline answer it, turned my stomach over. "There," the Lord said, and slapped the sentry across the face with the glove. "Now you have been spoken to like a man. Name your second, or stand off and let your betters pass." The slap was not hard. A glove is a small, soft thing. But I have thought many times since that it was the loudest small sound I ever heard. It cracked across the forecourt and into all of us, and I felt the man with the infant flinch, and I felt the flower seller's basket go still in her hands, and I felt the heat come up my own neck as if I had been struck. The sentry's head had turned perhaps an inch with the blow. It came back. The glove fell. And he stood exactly as he had stood before, the rifle at his shoulder, his eyes above the crowd, the fog running down his cap, as if nothing whatever had happened, as if a leaf had brushed him on its way to the ground. The Lord laughed. It was not a good laugh. "You see," he said, turning half to us, spreading his arms, "a painted post, a toy. They dress them up and stand them at the gate, but there's nothing inside. You could break it over your knee." Nobody laughed with him. That, I think, was the second thing he could not bear, that he had performed his contempt for a crowd, and the crowd had given him back the same silence the sentry had. He turned back. He bent a little unsteadily and picked up his glove from the wet stone. And then, because the wine had taken his judgment entirely now, and because a man who has slapped a statue and gotten nothing must do a worse thing or admit he has done a foolish one, he drew his arm back to strike the sentry again, this time across the mouth, this time with the hand. And a voice came out of the dark under the arch of the gate, low and very calm, and it said, "I should not, my lord, not that man." The Lord froze with his arm half raised. From under the arch a second figure stepped into the lamplight, an older man, broad in the shoulder, in the same gray as the sentry but with silver braid at his cuff and a crimson sash across his coat. He had the kind of weathered, unhurried face that has spent 30 years in weather, and he came forward without any haste at all, his boots ringing slow on the stone, and stopped a pace from the Lord. "Sergeant of the watch," he said, not to the Lord but to the air, the way men of his sort announce themselves so that no one need ask. "Cosgrave, you may put your hand down, my lord. It is bad for you up there." "It is bad for me," the Lord repeated, and laughed again, though it shook now. "Do you know who you are addressing, Sergeant? I am the Lord Alderine Voss of Voss Hollow and the 5 Mills, and my mother dines at that very table tonight at the king's own right hand. I shall have your post for this. I shall have his." He flung out a hand at the sentry. "He insulted me." He stood there like a thing of wood while I spoke to him, and a gentleman does not bear an insult. He has been struck. He may name his second or be named a coward in every drawing-room in the kingdom by morning. "He will name no second," said Sergeant Cosgrave. "Then he is a coward." "He is a sentry of the household foot on the king's gate," the sergeant said, "and he may not so much as turn his head to you, my lord, by the standing orders of this palace, on pain of losing the post he has earned. You have struck a man who is forbidden to answer you. I will leave it to you to decide what name that earns." I saw the words land. Even through the wine, I saw them land somewhere behind the Lord's eyes, a flicker, like a man who has put his boot through a board he thought was solid floor. But a proud man falling reaches for the nearest thing to break, and the nearest thing was still the sentry. "Forbidden to answer," the Lord sneered, recovering. "How very convenient for him. Then I shall answer for him. Stand off post. I will say it once more, and then I will walk through you." He took a step. He was very near the sentry now, close enough that I saw the sentry's breath and his own mingle in the cold, two clouds, the still one and the trembling one. Off, the cobbles. The sentry's eyes did not come down. "Last warning, my lord," said the sergeant, and there was no heat in it, which was somehow far worse than heat. "Step back from the post. Go up to your table. Sleep it off. In the morning you will be very glad you did." "I do not take orders from a sergeant," said the Lord Alderman Voss. And he put both his hands flat on the sentry's chest, on the gray wool over the crossbelt, and shoved with the whole weight of his wine and his temper, and his certainty that the world gives way to men like him, to push the sentry off the king's cobbles and out of his road. The sentry did not give way. I have thought about that moment more than any other. The Lord was not a small man, and he shoved in earnest, his boots scrabbling on the wet stone for purchase, and the sentry simply held. He did not push back. He did not strike. He did not even seem to brace. He stood as the gate's own railing stood, as the arch above him stood, and the Lord's shove spent itself against him and rebounded, and it was the Lord who staggered, who lost his footing on the slick cobbles, who went down hard on one knee in the wet with a cry more of fury than of pain. A sound went through the little crowd, not a laugh, nothing so cruel but a low murmur, an indrawn breath, the sound a crowd makes when a thing tips over that has been leaning a long time. The Lord came up off his knee white with rage, his fine trousers soaked dark, his hat gone into the gutter, his careful dignity gone with it. And in his hand, I did not see where it came from inside his coat, from the carriage, I never knew. There was now a short riding crop, a wicked little length of leather and whalebone, and he raised it over the sentry's face. "Then I will make you move," he said. What happened next happened very fast, and yet I see it slowly, the way you see the important things. Sergeant Cosgrave's hand closed on the Lord's wrist before the crop came down, not violently. He did not wrench it or twist it. He simply took hold of it, the way you take a child's hand near a fire, and held it in the air, and the Lord could not bring it down though he strained with all his strength, and the two of them stood locked under the lamp, the old soldier's grip patient and immovable, the young Lord's face working. "No, my lord," the sergeant said quietly, "not on my gate." And from the shadow of the arch, where I had not seen them gather, 3 more gray coats stepped out into the lamplight, unhurried, and ranged themselves in a quiet line, and the vain gate of the Garrowmore Palace was suddenly a very different place than the Lord had thought it 5 minutes before. The sergeant let go of the wrist. The crop came down, not at the sentry now, but slack at the Lord's side, because there was nothing left to swing it at. The gray coats had not laid a hand on him. They did not need to. They simply stood, 4 of them and the sergeant, in a loose half-ring, and the cold patience of them was a wall the Lord understood at last that he could not push over. "My lord," said Sergeant Cosgrave, "you have struck a sentry of the king's household with a glove, in the manner of a challenge before some 20 witnesses. You have shoved the same sentry while he stood his post. You have raised a crop to his face. These are not matters I have any power to overlook, and I would not if I could. You will give me that crop, and you will come with these men to the guard-room, and you will wait there, quiet, until the duty officer has heard the thing and decided what is to be done with it. If you go quietly, it is a short walk. If you do not, it is the same walk, but you will not enjoy it." "You cannot," the Lord said. His voice had gone thin. "You cannot lay hands on me, my name. Your name will be written in the occurrence book, my lord, same as any other, and spelled correct. That is the whole of what your name buys you here." The sergeant held out his hand flat for the crop. "Now, I will tell you." The Lord looked round at us then, at the little crowd. He looked for the thing a man of his sort always looks for in a crowd, the faces that will side with him, the ones who will say afterward, yes, the soldier provoked him, yes, the gentleman was within his rights, and he did not find a single one. The flower seller had set down her basket and folded her arms. The two clerks were watching him the way you watch a man you have decided about. The husband had drawn his wife and their sleeping infant a step back, not in fear of the soldiers, but away from him. And I confess I gave him nothing either, though I had sold sweets to 100 drunk young gentlemen and learned to keep a soft face for all of them. The face would not come. I was thinking of the small soft slap of that glove, and of the sentry's head turning an inch and coming back, and I had no softness left for the Lord Alderman Voss. He gave up the crop. They walked him in under the arch, 2 gray coats at his elbows, not gripping, just there, and the dark of the gate took him, and the forecourt let out its held breath all at once. The flower seller crossed herself. The clerks began to talk low and fast. The husband murmured something to his wife and she shook her head, and I looked as we all looked at the sentry. He had not moved. Through the whole of it, the glove, the shove, the crop, the half-ring of his own comrades, the Lord led away. He had stood his post at the right of the vain gate, rifle at the shoulder, eyes above the crowd, fog on his cap, as if he were a thing carved there. Only now, with the Lord gone and the sergeant turning back to him, did I see the smallest sign that he was a living man at all. A single muscle worked once in his jaw and was still. "Steady, Halloran," the sergeant said to him, very low, passing close. "Well held. You'll give your account inside when you're relieved. You did right to do nothing. You always do." And he touched the sentry once on the shoulder, the only kindness I saw given that night, and the sentry took it without turning his head, and the sergeant went in after his men. So now I had a name for him, Halloran. I rolled it over while the crowd thinned, while the carriages resumed their clattering up the mile, while the fog thickened and the lamps burned down their oil. Halloran, the painted post, the toy, the thing of wood you could break over your knee. I did not go home. I am not ashamed to say it. I packed my stall against the railings and I stayed, because I had the feeling, the prickling feeling you get perhaps 3 times in a life, that I had seen the beginning of a thing and ought to be there for the rest of it. And the rest of it began to arrive sooner than I expected. First it was a man I knew by sight, a clerk of the palace, who came down the state stair at a fast walk with a lantern, spoke through the gate to the sergeant, and went back up faster than he came. Then it was a closed carriage that came not up the mile but round from the inner court, and a tall, thin gentleman got out of it in evening dress with a chain of office about his neck, and went in under the arch without a word to anyone. I learned later he was the controller of the household, the man who keeps the king's roof in order, who answers for everything that happens under it, and who does not stir from the autumn table for a small thing. He had been sent for. That told me more than anything how the wind had turned. A drunk young lord slaps a sentry. That is a guardroom matter, a fine, a quiet word to his family, forgotten by spring. But the controller himself, leaving the king's supper, coming down to the gate in the cold, that was not the size of a small thing at all. The 2 clerks who had stayed near me told me why, between them, in the way crowds always know more than they should. It was not the slap, they said. The household had borne slaps before. A soldier's discipline is built to bear them. It was the crop, raised to strike a second time at a man who could not lift a finger to ward it. And it was, above all, the challenge, the glove, drawn off and laid across the face in the old murderous manner, demanding satisfaction with seconds and pistols. For the law of the kingdom had set its face hard against the duel these many years. Men had died in dawn fields over a wrong word, and the king had forbidden it, and to throw down the challenge, even drunk, even to a man forbidden to answer, was to flout the king's own peace on the king's own doorstep. "He'll wish he'd stayed home," one clerk said. "He'll wish he'd never been born to a name," said the other, "for the name is the half of it. A nobody does this. He sleeps it off in a cell and pays a crown, and that's the end. But the Lord Voss of the 5 Mills, with his mother at the king's right hand, every drawing room in the kingdom will have it by noon, and there is no fine you can pay to buy back what they'll say of you." I did not fully understand him then. I understood him entirely by the week's end. Inside, behind the lit windows of the state floor, the autumn table was still going on, the candles and the silver and the soft music drifting faintly down to us at the gate. And somewhere in that warm gold light sat the Lord's mother, who did not yet know that her son was in a cold guardroom below her feet, his name being written carefully into a book, the whole shape of his life bending in the dark like a coach taking a corner too fast. She knew within the hour. I saw her come down. The music inside had stopped, the supper breaking up, the carriages being called, and among the ladies in furs descending the state stair came one who did not descend as the others did. She came fast and alone, and a footman trotting after her with her cloak could not keep up. She was a handsome, upright woman of perhaps 60, with a face I would have called proud if it had not, that night, been simply afraid. She went straight to the gate and through the small door beside it, and the dark took her. What passed in that guardroom I did not see, but the clerks who fetched and carried for the palace heard it through the door, and the gate is a great trader in such things, and by the time the night was old I had the shape of it. She had come down meaning to mend it the way her sort mends everything. She had begun, they said, with the soft hand calling the duty officer by his rank, asking after his family, regretting most sincerely that her son, who was unwell, who had taken a chill, who was not himself, had so far forgotten himself as to cause a stir at the gate, and proposing gently that the matter be allowed to rest there between people of sense, with no need to trouble anyone above. The duty officer, they said, had heard her out with great courtesy, and then said that the matter could not rest there, as a challenge had been thrown and a sentry struck, and that the controller of the household had already been informed and was even now within. Then she had tried the firm hand. There would be, she gave them to understand, consequences for officers who did not know which doors to leave shut. She had friends. Her late husband had served the crown. Her son was young and foolish and would, of course, write any apology that was wished, to the soldier or to anyone else, and there an end. And then this is the part the gate told for a year afterward she had reached at the last for her purse. Not crudely. A lady of her house does not throw money on a table. But there was a paper offered, folded, a sum named that the clerks would not repeat for the size of it, to be given for the comfort of the soldier who had been put to such distress, and for the guardroom's funds, and let us all be friends and forget the night. And the controller of the household had said no. He had said it, they told me, very quietly, sitting at the duty officer's plain table with the occurrence book open before him under the lamp. He had not raised his voice once. He had said, "Madam, your son did not put the soldier to distress. The soldier is not distressed." The soldier stood his post and did his duty perfectly, which is the whole and only thing the soldier is required to do, and which your son could not move him from with a glove, or a shove, or a crop, or a name 300 years old. It is not the soldier who is in trouble in this room tonight. And he had pushed the folded paper back across the table, untouched, and said, "I will tell you what your money cannot buy, madam, so that you do not waste any more of it. It cannot buy a soldier's silence, for he has nothing to be silent about. He has done no wrong. It cannot buy the book's forgetting, for the book is the king's and not mine to blot. And it cannot buy back the thing your son spent tonight, which was not money and was not a post and was not even his liberty. He spent his honor on the king's own doorstep, in front of the king's own house, and there is no purse in the kingdom deep enough to redeem that, because the only coin it answers to is conduct, and conduct cannot be paid backward. It can only be lived forward, and your son must do that himself, and no one can do it for him." She had wept then, they said. Not the proud woman's tears of a defeat, but the plain, frightened tears of a mother who has understood, all at once, exactly how far her boy has fallen and exactly how little she can do to break that fall. And the controller, who was not an unkind man, had let her sit and had sent for tea, and had told her the truth as gently as the truth can be told, which is not very gently at all. The truth was this. The challenge, the glove across the face, demanding satisfaction by the old code, was, by the king's standing law, an offense in itself, the more grave for being made against a man bound by his duty not to answer it. There would be no quiet word and a fine. There would be a hearing before the household's own court of discipline in the cold light of a registered day, with the sergeant's account and the sentry's account, and the accounts of as many of the gate's witnesses as could be found. And whatever that court decided as to liberty and bond, and it might decide little, for the soldier was unhurt and the king's house did not thirst for a young fool's blood, the hearing itself would be a matter of record, and the record would be open, and the kingdom's drawing rooms would read it. That was the ruin, not a cell, not even a fine, the record. You see, the second clerk said to me low, as the Lord's mother's carriage was at last called and brought round empty to wait, for she would not leave without her son, and her son was not to be released that night. A young man may do a great many foolish things and live them down, so long as it is understood between gentlemen that they were foolish and are forgotten. But this one cannot be unsaid because it is written, and because of the manner of it. He did not merely make a fool of himself. He drew the old challenge, the killing challenge, the thing the king outlawed because too many sons came home in boxes, and he drew it against a man whose entire honor was in standing still and taking it. There is no version of that story that does him credit. There is no drawing room in the kingdom that will hear it and think him brave. They will think him a coward who struck a man who could not strike back, and a fool who broke the king's peace to do it, and a bully who needed 5 soldiers and a sergeant to be stopped from beating a sentry he had already knocked down. That is what they will think, because that is what it was. And his mother knows it, and that is why she is weeping in there, and not for the cell. I went home at last in the gray before dawn, when the lamps were guttering, and the lamplighter's boy came back down the mile with his ladder to put them out one by one. I did not sleep. I kept seeing the sentry's head turn that inch and come back. I kept thinking, he did nothing, and by doing nothing he undid a man more thoroughly than any blow could have. There is a strength in the world that has nothing to do with the arm, and I had watched it work, and I have never quite seen the gate the same way since. The hearing was held 9 days later, in a plain room of the palace's lower wing with high cold windows and a long table, before 3 officers of the household's court of discipline. I know what passed in it because I was called to it. My name had gone into the book that night, as a witness at the railings, and a soldier came to my stall a week later with a folded paper requesting Mr. Tobias Quill, confectioner of the King's Mile, to attend and give his account. I attended. I would have crawled there on the cobbles to attend. I will not set down the whole of it, for a hearing is a slow and careful machine, and most of its turning would weary you. But 3 moments of it I will carry to my grave. The first was the sergeant's account. Cosgrave stood at the foot of the long table with his cap under his arm and gave it plain, in the flat voice of a man who has given 100 accounts and learned to leave himself out of all of them. He told the glove and the shove and the crop in their order, and the times, and the standing orders that bound the sentry, and he did not color any of it, and he did not need to. When the senior officer asked him whether the sentry had given any provocation by word or look or gesture, Cosgrave said, "None, sir. He stood his post." That is the whole of what he did from the first to the last. He did not turn his head. I would have seen it. He did nothing, sir, and doing nothing under that was the hardest soldiering I have watched in 30 years, and I have watched a deal of it. The second was the sentry himself, Halloran. They brought him in to give his account, and I saw him for the first time without the tall cap, a younger man than I had thought, with a steady plain face and his hands folded behind him, and he stood very straight and answered very short. They asked him to describe the provocation. He described it briefly without heat. The order to give way, the glove, the shove, the crop. They asked him why he had not defended himself when the crop was raised. And he said, "It is not permitted, sir." A sentry on the king's gate may not leave his post or raise his hand except by the standing orders, on a graver cause than his own face. The orders are there so that the gate is the same for every man who comes to it, the great and the small alike. If I may set them aside for a lord who strikes me, then the next man sets them aside for a reason he likes better, and then there is no gate, only men deciding. So I stood. That is all, sir. I stood. There was a silence in the room after that. The senior officer wrote something, and then he asked the question I had not expected, and the whole hearing turned on it. "Private Halloran," he said, "the Lord Voss laid the glove across your face in the manner of a formal challenge, demanding satisfaction by arms. The court must ask you for the record. Do you, for your part, demand satisfaction of him? Do you wish the matter answered in the old way?" And Halloran said, "No, sir." "You may say more if you wish." "I do not wish his satisfaction, sir, and I will not give him mine. He wanted me to answer him with my hands in the field at dawn as one gentleman to another, so that whatever I did he could call it a quarrel between equals and walk away a man who had been brave. I will not give him that. He struck a wall. Let it be written that he struck a wall, and that the wall did not strike back, and that the wall is still standing at the gate where it was. That is the only satisfaction I want, sir, that it be written true. I have heard fine speeches in my life, from pulpits and platforms. I have never heard anything that emptied a proud man out so completely as those few flat words from a private soldier, who would not be made into a duelist to flatter the man who had assaulted him. The Lord, who sat across the room, very pale and very sober, and very much smaller than he had looked under the lamp, seemed to fold inward as Halloran spoke, as if each plain sentence took something out of him that he would not get back. The third moment was the finding. The court took little time over it. They found that the sentry had given no provocation and committed no fault, and they entered it so, in words, that Private Halloran had conducted himself throughout in perfect accordance with his orders and the honor of the household, and that one sentence, read aloud in that cold room, was worth more to him, I think, than any medal, for it was the kingdom saying through its own court that the painted post had been the only true man at the gate that night. And they found that the Lord Alderman Voss had struck a sentry of the king's household, had assaulted him while he stood his post, and had thrown a formal challenge in violation of the king's peace and the king's express law against the duel. For the assault and the breach of the peace they bound him over and laid a fine upon him, a heavy one, but money, only money, and his mother could pay it and did. The cell they spared him. The king's house, as the clerk had said, did not thirst for a young fool's blood. But the finding was the king's, and the finding was written, and the finding was open. It was in the broadsheets within the week. Not his name, at first, they called him a young nobleman of the western mills, but a name 300 years old is not so easily hidden, and the drawing rooms had it by the second day, and after that there was no hiding it at all, and the drawing rooms did with it exactly what the clerk at the gate had foretold to the letter. They did not call him brave. There is no way to tell that story and come out brave. A man who slaps a soldier forbidden to slap back, who shoves him and is shoved over by his own shove, who raises a crop and has to be stopped by an old sergeant's hand, who throws the killing challenge of his grandfathers at a private who cannot answer it, and then is told by that very private in open court that he is not worth the answering. That man does not become a legend at the supper tables. He becomes a story told to make young men careful. The Voss who struck the wall, they called him. The Lord the gate would not give way to. I heard a version of it told, embroidered and merry, in a coffee house on the far side of the river not a month later, by men who had never been within a mile of the vain gate, and the teller did not even know it was true. He left the city before the spring. Voss Hollow and the 5 mills are a long way west, and a man can be quiet there, and I suppose he is quiet there still. His mother stayed a while longer, and then she went too. The invitations had stopped coming, you see. Not with any cruelty, no one cut her, no one was rude, but the cards simply did not arrive as they had, and the great houses found that season that their tables were unaccountably full whenever a Voss might have been asked. That is how the world of the drawing rooms ruins a man, not with a blow, with an absence. with 1,000 small doors closing so softly, you cannot say you heard a single one of them shut. And the sentry. The sentry went back to the gate. Of course he did. There was never any question of where Halloran would be. The morning after the hearing, I came down the mile to open my stall in the cold, and there he was at the right of the vane gate, under the third lamp, in the long gray greatcoat with the tall black cap and the rifle at his shoulder, his eyes fixed on the dark river beyond the mile, the fog beating on the peak of his cap and running down, and he did not blow on his hands, and he did not shift his weight, and you would never in 1,000 mornings have guessed that this was the man the whole kingdom was talking of. He was simply at his post. He was always simply at his post. I will tell you a small thing to finish, because it is the thing I think of when I think of that winter, and not the Lord at all. For a while after, the gate drew a different sort of crowd. People came to look at Halloran at the famous wall, the post the Lord could not move, the way they come to look at anything that has been in the broadsheets. They pointed. Some of them, I am sorry to say, tried to make him react, the way the cruel and the bored always will, calling out to him, waving, once a young fool reaching through the bars to flick at his crossbelt. And Halloran stood, exactly as he had stood for the Lord, eyes above their heads, giving them nothing, until they grew bored of getting nothing and went away. For there is nothing on this earth so dull to a crowd as a man who will not perform for it. But there were others. There was an old soldier with one sleeve pinned up who came one frozen morning and stood at the railings a long time, not calling out, only watching, and then drew himself up as straight as his one arm would let him and saluted the gate. And Halloran, I saw it. I was 10 feet away. Halloran's eyes came down for the first and only time I ever witnessed, came down and met the old man's, just for the space of a breath, and something passed between them that had no words in it. And then his eyes went back up to the river, and the old soldier lowered his arm and walked away content. There was a young mother who lifted her small son to see the brave soldier who stood still, and I confess I had to look at my own boots for a moment. And there was, more than once, a man of the better sort, the very sort the Lord had been, who slowed his carriage at the gate and looked out at Halloran with a strange, sobered expression, as a man looks at a thing he might have done himself, in another mood on another night, and was glad past saying that he had not. That, I think, was the truest ruin of the Lord Alderyn Voss, and the truest vindication of the soldier he struck. The Lord had wanted, that night, to prove that the gate would give way to him, that his name and his temper and the old code of his fathers could move any wall in the kingdom if he pushed it hard enough. And the gate had not given way. A single quiet man in a gray coat, forbidden to lift his hand, had stood against everything the Lord could bring, and had won the whole quarrel by doing nothing at all but his plain duty, and had not even troubled to enjoy the winning. I keep my stall at the corner of the King's Mile yet, though I am an old man now and the lamps are not gas any more, and the lamplighter's boy is long grown and gone. There are new sentries at the Vane Gate. Halloran himself went up in his time, to sergeant and beyond, and they tell me he is retired these years to a quiet house by the sea, where I hope the fog does not run down anyone's collar. But I have told this story to every soul who would sit still for it, and I tell it now to you, and I will tell you the moral of it as I have come to understand it, standing at that gate the better part of my life. The world is full of men who believe a thing will move if they only push it hard enough, or shout at it loud enough, or wave a great enough name at it. They are wrong, most of them, about most things. The strongest thing at any gate is not the man who shoves. It is the man who has decided, long before any shove arrives, exactly where he will stand and why, and who will not be moved from it for a glove, or a crop, or a fortune, or a name 300 years old, and who does not even need to strike you to prove it, because the standing is the proof, and the standing is enough. The Lord Voss struck a wall, that night under the gas lamps, and the wall, being a wall, did the only thing a wall need ever do. It stood and he fell,